There are pages of text messages between Suzanne and her closest friend Sheila, telling her that Barry is manipulating and trying to pull their daughters into fights. In one text, it appears they did involve the girls. Suzanne wrote, "He sat there as the ringleader the day he cut himself." She's talking about a work injury. "And told them all of the things I believe and got them all upset and was just sitting back and egging on, as if he felt justified and happy they were taking his side."
If they've seen the photos, if they've read the texts.
Texts, including those from Suzanne to a friend. Makes me wonder what the young me was thinking, one text reads.
The photographs of Barry Morphew's travels, both around the house in a kind of a zigzag manner, and his visits to trash receptacles day after is pretty suspicious.
In another text, Suzanne mentions to Sheila making things work with Barry only until her youngest is old enough to be out of the house. She said Barry's response was, "Okay, let's just tell the girls I'm leaving and how you feel you don't want me." You can see the picture the prosecution is trying to paint with these texts.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear. Thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science. Less than 2 months before her murder, Suzanne and a friend, Sheila, exchanged a series of texts. In these texts on March 25th, Suzanne shares her private concerns regarding Barry's behavior, as well as her feelings towards her daughters Macy and Mallory. In a very real sense, these texts are Suzanne's voice speaking on her behalf after her disappearance. So let's go through them. March 25th, 2020. From Sheila. "He's not going to be irrational," meaning Barry is not going to be irrational. "Did something happen yesterday that brought this on, or is it just the everyday normal that is building up and wearing you down?" So Sheila is asking, is this something random, or is it something that is part of a pattern, something that is escalating? And Suzanne answers very simply, very obviously, money stuff. That is the issue that is building up and wearing her down, money stuff. It's sketchy, which is another way of saying it's suspicious what's going on. Was he planning on going with Mallory, or was that just a snag at getting someone on his side? Then Suzanne says, "I need to ask your opinion on it. He also asked me if I'm talking to anyone about our marriage, like friends." Now, think about that. Think about Barry saying to his wife, who later disappears, "Are you telling anyone about the problems that we are having?" And this is really an important question to be asking, because I think it is in a woman's best interest to talk to other people about these private issues, because if she doesn't, then the husband can then take the narrative and basically make up whatever story he wants. And of course, that's exactly what Barry did. He said they had the perfect marriage. There was nothing, apparently, to counter that narrative. Anyway, Sheila responds, "Make sure he doesn't see your phone. You keep it with you." Suzanne answers, "Yes." "When will he be home?" "Probably late." Their messages resume at 7:54 p.m. "Ugh, he came home when the girls are gone. He won't speak of divorce. Begging for another chance. I'm so torn." So here she obviously brings up divorce. His response is to beg her for another chance. That's quite a strong word, not just asking for another chance. And obviously, Barry's appeals do actually touch Suzanne. And I think the appeals focus on their children. How's it going to affect them? And then she says, "But in my heart, I know who he is." That's also huge. You know, the penny has dropped for her with Barry. "Isn't that what he always says?" Sheila responds. "How long can you keep forgiving him?" That was convenient timing too, in terms of him coming home after the girls had left. Suzanne responds, "That's what I told him. He threw the 70 times 7 at me." That's a reference to, in the Bible, that you should forgive someone 70 times 7 times. So Barry's been quite manipulative in a sense here, basically using the Bible and her feelings towards her daughters to soften her stance against him. And so she says, he is always using scripture when it's convenient. Then about a week later, their conversation resumes, and it's really on the same track. Now, bear in mind, we are now barely a month and a week away from her murder. Sheila says, "How are things on the home front right now? Any changes?" And then Suzanne provides this fairly long explanation. She says, "It changes like the wind, as usual." Long text this morning of apology and declaration. So even a week later, he's still apologizing and making a declaration. He's sort of, I guess, making a statement of what he's going to be doing. And then she says, "It's sad. I feel bad." Doesn't it sound like she's already resigned to a particular outcome? She's already made up her mind. She says, "I don't want to cause him to have to do this. There's just become a point that the reality of what's never been there is sobering." Doesn't it feel like she's had a real change of heart? There's been a inflection point. There's been a turn in the road. And then she says, "And I've accepted what is. He can't change the core person, you know." Makes me wonder what the young me was thinking. So even her saying he can't change the core person, you kind of get the sense that she knows who the core person is and doesn't really accept that, doesn't really want that. And then Sheila asks a very important question. Does he feel that reality too? And then Suzanne doesn't really address that. She says, "I was a broken girl just looking for stability, and I had no confidence in who I was." One has a sense that after many, many years, she has sort of put those pieces together and has achieved a certain level of confidence in who she is at this point. He thinks we are great as long as he's getting what he wants, meaning that is the reality that he feels. Basically is in denial. He basically just wants what he wants. He wants control. The young us can't see past the outside of things. That's the wisdom they told us about that we would have till we got older. I think meaning we wouldn't have till we got older. Wish there was a way to have more of that in our younger years, meaning not being so preoccupied with the exterior, but more of who someone really is. Anyway, she says, "I have regrets, but Mel and Macy are the sweetest parts to this. No mistake there." So very true. God's plan, every bit of it. Thank you for asking, how's the remote teaching going? And that is really the end of that discussion. It seems to sort of peter out, seems to fizzle into just a sort of acceptance of God's plan, and then look at where things ultimately went. Do you agree that what Suzanne needed here was critical thinking? She needed to think about her marriage critically and use that every iota of her confidence and her sense of identity, the sense of who she was, in order to see exactly what was going on. In any event, I do think it really stands out, her saying, the reality of what's never been there is sobering. And then to allow that reality to linger became ultimately very dangerous for her. And so what these texts show was a very clear reality check, a wake-up call for Suzanne, but it was too little, too late.
In the documents, you'll also see images of scratch marks on Morphew's arm, taken just days after Suzanne disappeared by investigators. There's also the sheath to the dart cap found in the Morphew's dryer. This is what sparked the main theory investigators have gone with, that Morphew shot his wife with a tranquilizer dart. Investigators have said that cell phone pings or GPS data indicate he was chasing his wife around the house after he shot her.
I'm not going to take it further than that. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.